A Marine was buying groceries when his canine suddenly froze. An old veteran stood ahead counting coins coming up. $3.86, someone in line muttered. Put something back. But the dog didn't move. It growled, then stepped back. And what the Marine saw next, and what was waiting outside, turned a simple moment into something no one in that store would ever forget. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. A hard Alaskan cold pressed against Anchorage that morning, turning the supermarket windows pale with frost and making every breath outside feel like broken glass. Staff Sergeant Lucas Halle moved through the sliding doors without hurry but not without awareness. At 38, the former United States Marine carried himself with the kind of contained force that never really left men like him after service. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, his body still held in fighting condition by habit more than vanity, with a squared jaw, a straight nose that had once been broken and healed slightly off-center, and close-cropped dark brown hair already touched by a little gray at the temples. Light stubble shadowed his face, not careless enough to be called a beard, just the look of a man who rarely wasted time on mirrors. His eyes were the coldest thing about him, not cruel, only guarded. A pale steel blue that seemed to measure exits, hands, voices, and danger without asking permission. Lucas was not unfriendly by nature. Life had simply sanded down the parts of him that used to speak first. Afghanistan had taken friends. Civilian life had taken the illusion that peace meant quiet. Now he lived in the narrow space between discipline and distance, saying little, watching everything, trusting almost no one except the dog pacing at his left knee. Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with rich amber-toned fur darkened along the spine and ears, moved with the clean, controlled confidence of a trained canine who had spent years learning the difference between noise and threat. He was powerful without bulk, intelligent without restlessness, and there was something almost human in the way he studied the world. Head slightly lowered, ears tuned, eyes alert but never frantic. Lucas had worked with Rex long enough to recognize the smallest changes in him. A twitch of the ear, a shift in breathing, a hesitation in step. Those things meant more than most people's words. Rex had been through enough with Lucas to become more than a working dog. He was routine, warning system, witness, and in the lonelier corners of the last few years, the closest thing Lucas had allowed himself to call family. The supermarket was warm, bright, and ordinary in the way only grocery stores could be. Fluorescent lights washed every aisle in a flat, forgiving glow. A young mother guided a cart with one hand while keeping a toddler from grabbing candy with the other. A stock clerk stacked soup cans with the bored precision of someone counting the end of his shift. Somewhere deeper in the store, a pop song from 10 years ago played too softly to identify. It should have been a normal stop. Coffee, eggs, dog food, maybe bread. Get in, get out. Say as little as possible. Lucas collected what he needed and headed for the checkout lanes. He chose the shortest line, more instinct than preference, and stood with a basket in one hand while Rex settled beside him. For a few seconds there was nothing remarkable in front of him. Just the back of an elderly man in a faded olive jacket, a basket on the conveyor, and the thin sound of items being scanned. Then Rex changed. The dog went still so suddenly it sent a quiet tension up Lucas's spine. Not the rigid stillness before aggression. Not the forward-leaning lock of a dog preparing to intercept a threat. This was stranger. Rex's muscles tightened beneath his coat. A low growl rolled out of his chest. And then, most unusual of all, he shifted half a step backward instead of forward. Lucas's fingers tightened on the basket handle. He had seen Rex react to concealed weapons, panic attacks, hostile body language, drunk men, and bad intent. This was different. The dog was not warning of attack. He was responding to damage. Lucas followed Rex's line of sight to the old man at the register. Harold Bennett looked about 78. Though hardship had a way of adding years that calendars never counted. He was thin in the chest and shoulders, the kind of thin that came from living too long on less than enough. His posture had a permanent inward bend, not dramatic enough to call, frail but enough to suggest pain carried quietly for years. Wisps of white hair showed beneath a weathered Vietnam veteran cap, and his face was a map of deep lines carved by cold, age, and endurance. His skin had the dry, pale cast of someone who spent more time worrying than resting. He wore a jacket that had once been sturdy and warm but was now shiny at the elbows and cuffed with wear. One sleeve had been mended by hand. Harold's hands shook as he reached into a worn leather wallet and emptied coins onto the counter. The cashier, Ashley Mercer, looked no older than 23. She was petite with straight blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail and a face that still held the softness of youth, though this morning impatience had tightened it. There was nothing cruel in her, yet only fatigue, and the brittle efficiency of someone, underpaid and too used to inconvenience arriving in human form. Her name tag sat crooked over a red vest. She scanned the last item and read the total in a flat voice. Harold began counting quarters, then dimes, then nickels. His lips moved silently with the math. Lucas watched the man's face more than the money. Shame had a look of its own. It lived in the way Harold kept his chin lowered, in the way he apologized before anyone had accused him of anything, in the faint tremor at the edge of his mouth each time he separated another coin from the pile. But under that shame was something else, fear, not sharp, not immediate, something older. Rex's eyes never left him. Lucas crouched slightly, resting a hand against Rex's shoulder. The dog was warm, solid, and humming with tension. "Easy," Lucas murmured, though he wasn't calming him. He was listening through him. Harold reached for another coin, fumbled it, and it rolled off the counter. He bent too quickly to retrieve it, shoulders tightening as if expecting punishment for taking too long. Then he glanced toward the front doors. Lucas followed that glance. Outside, through the frost-blurred glass, a man stood near a pickup truck. Dark parka, black knit cap, still watching, not waiting, watching. Lucas felt something old and familiar shift into place inside him. Harold looked back down quickly, as if even that glance had been a mistake. He gathered his coins again, hands shaking more now. The line behind Lucas shifted, impatience growing, but Lucas no longer heard them. The store, the music, the movement, none of it mattered anymore. Rex had stopped growling. That was worse. The dog stood completely silent now. Every line of his body focused forward. Eyes locked on Harold Bennett like he was tracking something invisible but very real. Lucas straightened slowly, his gaze narrowing between the trembling old man and the figure outside the glass. This wasn't about groceries. And for the first time that morning, Lucas Halle stopped thinking about coffee. The line crept forward under bright lights that made everything too visible. Coins, faces, hesitation, and the quiet weight of being watched. Harold Bennett's fingers hovered above the small scatter of coins on the counter, as if choosing the wrong one might somehow make things worse. The total sat on the screen in cold green numbers, unmoving, indifferent. He had counted twice already. The result did not change. His shoulders seemed to fold inward another inch as he whispered the number to himself again, barely audible, as if saying it too loudly would make it more real. Across from him, Ashley Mercer shifted her weight, scanning the growing line behind. Lucas, with a glance that tried to remain professional, but couldn't quite hide the pressure building behind her eyes. She wasn't cruel, not really, just tired, overstretched, and learning too early how often kindness slowed things down in a place that rewarded speed. Behind Lucas, the man in the quilted work jacket leaned forward just enough for his voice to carry, low but sharp. The kind of comment meant to sound casual but land heavy. If you can't afford it, don't hold up the line. He was in his mid-40s, broad across the stomach, face reddened by cold and irritation. A man used to measuring time in minutes lost rather than people struggling in front of him. He didn't look at Harold directly when he said it, which somehow made it worse. It turned the words into something ambient like background noise that still cut. Harold froze. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone in a hurry to notice, but Lucas saw it. The tiny pause, the way the old man's breath caught before he forced it out again. The coins in his hand trembled slightly more as he lowered them to the counter. Shame spread across his face in a slow, quiet way. Not explosive, not defensive, just accepted. Like this wasn't the first time. Rex moved before Lucas did. The German shepherd stepped forward, not in a burst, not in alarm, but with a deliberate, quiet intention. He closed the small distance between himself and Harold and lifted his head, just enough to rest it gently against the old man's hand. The contact was soft, almost cautious, like he was testing whether he would be pushed away. Harold startled at first, fingers tightening instinctively, then loosening as he looked down. For a moment, confusion replaced everything else on his face. Then something else crept in, something fragile. Relief, maybe, or recognition of something safe in a place that hadn't felt safe a second ago? Lucas watched the shift closely. Rex didn't offer comfort like this unless he had already decided something important. The dog wasn't responding to pity. He was responding to distress he couldn't ignore. Ashley cleared her throat again, softer this time. "Sir, you're short 386, she said, the words quieter now, less edge in them. "You'll need to put something back." The sentence came out more carefully, as if she'd become aware, just a little too late, that the situation wasn't as simple as inconvenience. Harold nodded quickly, almost too quickly, as if eager to agree before anyone could press him further. "Yes, yes, of course," he murmured. His voice was thin, but steady in the way of someone trying very hard to hold it together. He looked down at the items on the belt: bread, eggs, milk. There was nothing unnecessary there, nothing he could easily sacrifice. His eyes moved between them, calculating, not just cost, but consequence. Bread meant meals stretched. Eggs meant protein he might not get. Otherwise, milk. He hesitated on the milk. Longer than the others? As if it held some small piece of normal life he didn't want to lose. Then he glanced toward the doors again. This time, Lucas didn't need to follow the movement. He already knew where to look. The man outside hadn't moved far. He stood just beyond the automatic doors, shoulders relaxed, one hand tucked into his jacket pocket, the other resting loosely at his side. He was tall, maybe early 40s, with a narrow face partially shadowed by the knit cap pulled low over his brow. There was stubble along his jaw, uneven, like it hadn't been shaved with care. His posture had that loose stillness Lucas recognized immediately, the kind that wasn't boredom, but patience sharpened into something more deliberate. His eyes were fixed inside, not scanning, not distracted, locked, waiting. Harold's gaze snapped away from the door again, quicker this time, as if even that glance had been too long. His breathing had changed. It was shallow now, almost measured, like he was trying to keep it quiet. Lucas felt the pattern settle into place in his mind, pieces aligning without needing explanation. This wasn't a man embarrassed by being short a few dollars. This was a man who believed being short might cost him more than groceries. Rex's ears twitched once, then settled forward again. The dog didn't look at the door. He didn't need to. Whatever he had sensed in Harold was enough. "I'll just take the bread and eggs," Harold said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. That'll be fine." He reached out as if to remove the milk himself, hands moving with that same careful hesitation, like even this small action required permission. Lucas stepped forward before the motion completed. "Ring it all together," he said, placing his basket down behind Harold's items. His tone was calm, even, not loud enough to draw attention, but firm enough that it didn't invite argument. Ashley blinked, caught between surprise and relief. "All together?" she asked, just to confirm. Lucas nodded once. "His and mine." Harold turned, confusion overtaking the fear for a moment. Up close, the lines in his face were deeper, the skin thinner, eyes a pale, tired blue that seemed to carry years Lucas didn't need explained. "Sir, I can't." "You're not doing anything," Lucas cut in gently. Not harsh, just decisive. "You're checking out." "I'm checking out." That's it. There was a pause, small but heavy. Harold looked at him, searching for something. Judgment, expectation, a condition that hadn't been stated yet. When he didn't find it, The confusion remained, but the resistance softened. He nodded slowly as if accepting a rule he didn't fully understand, but didn't dare challenge. Ashley scanned the items back through, including the milk Harold had almost given up. The total climbed, settled, finalized. Lucas handed over his card without looking at the screen. His attention stayed on Harold, not intrusive, just present. Rex remained where he was, head still resting lightly against Harold's hand until the old man, almost unconsciously, let his fingers brush through the dog's fur. The contact lingered a second longer than necessary. When the receipt printed, Ashley handed it to Lucas then, after a brief hesitation, tore off a duplicate and passed it to Harold. "You're all set," she said quietly. Her tone changed in a way she might not have noticed herself. Harold took the paper as if it weighed more than it should. "Thank you," he said, but the words came out uneven, not quite matching the situation. Gratitude was there, but it was tangled with something else, anxiety, urgency. He gathered his small bag quickly, almost clumsily, and turned toward the exit. Lucas didn't stop him. He didn't say anything else. He just watched. The doors slid open with a soft mechanical sigh as Harold stepped out into the cold. The man outside shifted for the first time, subtle but unmistakable. He straightened slightly, pushing off the truck, his attention sharpening the moment Harold crossed the threshold. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement that anyone else might be watching. Harold didn't look at him. He walked past too fast for someone his age, head down, shoulders tight, every movement controlled by something. That had nothing to do with the temperature outside. The man fell in behind him, not close enough to touch, not far enough to lose him, just right. Lucas picked up his receipt without looking at it, then set it down again on the counter. He didn't need it. Beside him, Rex had already turned toward the door, body aligned, waiting. Lucas's gaze fixed on the two figures, moving away across the frost-covered pavement. And this time he didn't hesitate. The cold outside hit harder than before, sharper, as if the air itself had teeth, and Lucas stepped through it without slowing, his focus already narrowing on the two figures moving across the parking lot. Harold Bennett walked too fast for a man his age, his steps uneven, shoulders hunched forward as if bracing against something more than the wind. The plastic bag in his hand rustled with each hurried movement. The thin material stretched tight around its contents, like it might tear under pressure. He didn't look back, not once. That alone told Lucas enough. People who weren't afraid checked behind them. People who were learned not to. The man in the dark parka followed at a distance that was practiced, not guessed. He didn't rush, didn't call out, didn't close the gap too quickly. He let Harold set the pace, adjusting his own steps just enough to stay behind him, always present, never obvious. That kind of movement didn't come from instinct, it came from repetition. Lucas slowed slightly, keeping enough distance that he wouldn't draw attention, but close enough that he wouldn't lose them if they turned. Beside him, Rex had already shifted modes. The softness he'd shown in the store was gone. His body lowered just a fraction, weight evenly distributed, head level with his spine, ears forward and locked. This was not curiosity anymore. This was tracking. "Easy," Lucas said under his breath, though his own pulse had begun to steady into something familiar. Not adrenaline, not yet, just readiness. They crossed the edge of the parking lot and moved behind the supermarket, where the light fell off quickly and the sounds of the front faded into a dull, distant hum. The alley there was narrow, lined with metal dumpsters and stacked delivery crates, the ground slick with a thin layer of ice that caught the dim light in patches. It was the kind of place designed for utility, not visibility, the kind of place where things happen without witnesses. Harold turned into it without hesitation. That was the second thing that told Lucas this wasn't new. He wasn't being led there. He was going where he had gone before. Lucas stopped just short of the alley entrance, pressing himself lightly against the cold brick corner. He didn't need to see everything to understand the shape of what was about to happen. He listened first. Boots on ice, the soft crinkle of plastic, a breath pulled too tight, then a voice. "You're late." The man in the parka stepped into view, closing the distance now that they were out of sight. Up close, he was taller than Lucas had first judged, with a lean build that suggested strength without bulk. His face was narrow, cheekbones sharp under weathered skin, and his jaw was lined with uneven stubble that gave him a permanently rough edge. His eyes were dark, not expressive, not angry, just flat, like whatever reaction most people would have in a situation like this had been filed away long ago. There was no rush in him, no heat, just control. Harold flinched at the sound, turning halfway before stopping himself. I had trouble at the store, he said, voice shaking now in a way he could no longer hide. Prices, they went up again. I don't care about prices, the man cut in, his tone low and even. He stepped closer, boots scraping lightly on the frozen ground. I care about what you owe. Harold's grip tightened on the bag. I told you I don't have it. Not today. Maybe next week when the check a hand shot out faster than Harold could react, grabbing the front of his jacket and pulling him forward hard enough that the plastic bag slipped from his fingers and hit the ground. Eggs shifted inside with a dull crack. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You don't get to decide the schedule, he said, leaning in just enough that Harold had to tilt his head back to meet his gaze. You get the money. You bring it. That's how this works, Lucas felt the words settle in the place like pieces locking into a pattern he had seen before, just in different uniforms, different countries, different languages. Pressure applied slowly, targets chosen carefully, no witnesses, no noise. Harold's hands came up instinctively, not to fight, just to create space. Please, he said, the word barely holding together. It's just been a bad month. The man pushed him back harder this time, slamming him against the metal side of a dumpster. The impact echoed through the alley, hollow and sharp. Harold gasped, the air leaving him in a rush that sounded too fragile for a man who had once survived war. And then the man said it. You're not the only one who owes. The sentence didn't rise. It didn't fall. It just landed. Lucas didn't need anything else. This wasn't random. This wasn't desperation meeting opportunity. This was structure, repetition. A system built on people who had already learned how to endure without asking for help. Beside him, Rex's entire body shifted forward half an inch. The dog's breathing had changed, deeper now, controlled, ready. His eyes flicked once to Lucas, not questioning, not uncertain, waiting. Lucas exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening just enough to feel it. He didn't move yet, not because he hesitated, but because timing mattered. You didn't step in too early and lose the shape of the situation. You stepped in when it counted. Harold tried again, his voice breaking this time. I gave you everything last month. I don't have anything left until you'll find it, the man said, releasing his grip just enough to shove him back again. Or next time we take something else. You understand me? There was not just money, control. Lucas's fingers curled slightly at his side. He felt the old line inside him, the one that separated observation from action, start to thin. Rex didn't growl this time. He went silent. That silence was sharper than any warning. Lucas stepped forward out of the shadow of the wall, boots crunching lightly on the ice, his presence cutting into the space before the man could react fully. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He simply closed the distance until he was close enough to be undeniable. Let him go. The words were calm, flat, not loud, but they carried. The man turned, slow at first, then faster as he registered that they were no longer alone. His eyes moved over Lucas once, measuring, calculating, adjusting. Then they dropped briefly to Rex. That was when something shifted. Not fear, awareness. You should keep walking, the man said, voice still level, but tighter now around the edges. This doesn't concern you, Lucas's gaze didn't leave him. It does now. For a moment, no one moved. The alley held its breath. Harold slid down the side of the dumpster slightly, trying to steady himself, one hand pressed against the cold metal, the other hovering uncertainly near his chest. He looked between the two men, confusion and fear tangled together, as if unsure whether the situation had just improved or gotten worse. Rex stepped forward one pace, placing himself slightly ahead of Lucas, body angled, not aggressive, but unmistakably ready. His ears were forward, eyes locked, muscles coiled under his coat like a spring pulled tight. Lucas felt it fully now. The line had been crossed, and there was no stepping back from it. The cold in the alley didn't bite as sharply anymore. Not because the temperature had changed, but because something else had taken its place. Control, deliberate and unshaken, settling into Lucas Hale's posture the way it had 100 times before when a situation crossed from observation into action. The man in the parka still had one hand loosely gripping the front of Harold's jacket, but the moment Lucas stepped into full view, that grip loosened just enough to signal calculation. He didn't step back immediately. Men like him didn't retreat without first measuring the cost. His eyes moved over Lucas again, slower this time, taking in the stance, the shoulders, the stillness that didn't come from uncertainty, but from restraint. Then they dropped to Rex. That was the deciding factor. Rex stood between them now, one step ahead of Lucas, body angled slightly, head low, eyes fixed with a quiet intensity that carried no noise but promised consequence. His lips didn't pull back. His teeth didn't show. That made it worse. It meant he didn't need theatrics. His muscles were coiled under his coat, every inch of him prepared to move faster than thought if needed. The man exhaled slowly through his nose. "You're making a mistake," he said, but there was less certainty in it now. "Not fear, not yet, but a recalibration?" Lucas didn't respond to the words. He stepped closer instead, closing the distance in a way that forced the man to make a decision. Hold position and escalate, or step back and lose ground. His voice, when it came, was low and even. "Let him go." There was a beat of silence. Then the man's hand released Harold completely, not in surrender, but in strategy. He took one step back, then another, eyes never leaving Lucas. His jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of irritation breaking through the control he'd held so carefully. "This isn't over," he said, quieter now, almost like a promise rather than a threat. Then he turned, boots crunching against the ice as he walked out of the alley, not rushing, not looking back. Lucas watched him go until the figure disappeared beyond the corner of the building. Only then did he shift his attention back. Harold Bennett was still pressed against the dumpster, one hand braced against the metal, the other hovering uncertainly near his chest, as if checking that everything was still where it should be. His breathing was uneven, shallow, the aftermath of fear settling into his body in waves. Up close, the fragility of him was impossible to ignore. The way his jacket hung loose on his frame, the faint tremor that hadn't stopped even after the threat had stepped away. "You all right?" Lucas asked, not moving too close, giving him space to answer without pressure. Harold nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, I'm fine," he said, though his voice betrayed him, thin and unsteady. He bent down to pick up the dropped grocery bag, wincing slightly as he did. The eggs inside had cracked, a faint dampness spreading through the plastic. He didn't comment on it. He simply adjusted his grip and held it tighter, as if losing even that would be too much. Rex stepped forward again, slower this time, lowering his head and brushing it lightly against Harold's side. The old man froze for a second, then exhaled, a long breath that seemed to release something he'd been holding back for longer than just this morning. His hand moved, almost without thinking, resting briefly on Rex's neck. Lucas noticed everything. The reaction, the relief, the way Harold's shoulders dropped just slightly under the dog's presence. "Where do you live?" Lucas asked. Harold hesitated. The question seemed to catch him off guard more than the confrontation had. "Just a few blocks," he said after a moment. "I can manage." Lucas looked at the cracked eggs, the shaking hands, the alley still echoing with what had just happened. "I'll walk you." It wasn't framed as a question. Harold opened his mouth as if to refuse, then closed it again. Something in Lucas's tone made it clear the decision had already been made. He nodded once, small, resigned, but not resistant. They walked in silence at first. The streets of Anchorage stretched, out in quiet lines of snow-paved sidewalks and low buildings, the cold air settling into everything it touched. Harold's pace slowed now that the immediate pressure had passed, each step more careful, more deliberate. Lucas matched it without comment, his eyes occasionally scanning the surroundings out of habit, checking corners, windows, reflections. Rex stayed close to Harold's side. After a few blocks, they turned onto a narrower street lined with older houses, the kind built decades ago and kept standing more by habit than by maintenance. Harold stopped in front of a small, weathered structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch that leaned slightly to one side. The windows were intact, but the frames showed signs of age, and the steps creaked under even Harold's light weight as he climbed them. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Not freezing, but not warm enough to call comfortable. The space was small, cluttered without being chaotic. Bill sat stacked on a narrow table near the door. Envelopes opened, some marked in red ink. A faint smell of old paper and something like damp wood lingered in the room. Lucas stepped in behind him, taking it all in without comment. Harold set the grocery bag down carefully on the counter, removing the items one by one as if preserving what little control he had left. The cracked eggs were set aside. He didn't throw them away. "You didn't have to do that," Harold said after a moment, his back still turned. "Back there, most people, they just walk." Lucas leaned slightly against the wall, arms loose at his sides. "Most people didn't see what I saw." Harold didn't respond immediately. His shoulders stiffened, then eased again, as if deciding how much truth to allow into the room. Lucas's gaze shifted, moving across the small space until it landed on a wall near the far corner. A photograph hung there, slightly crooked, the frame old but clean. He stepped closer without thinking. Two men stood in the picture. One was clearly Harold, younger, stronger, wearing a uniform that fit him differently than the clothes he wore now. The other, Lucas, stopped. The man beside Harold was young, maybe mid-20s, with a broad grin and a posture that carried the same kind of easy confidence Lucas had seen in men who hadn't yet learned how quickly that could be taken away. Dark hair, sharp jawline, a scar just above the eyebrow. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. "Where was this taken?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Harold turned, following his gaze. For a moment, something like recognition passed through his expression. Not of Lucas, but of the memory itself. "Da Nang," he said softly, 1969. Lucas nodded slowly, eyes still on the photograph. He didn't say the name out loud, but he knew it. That was enough. Behind him, Rex shifted slightly, settling down near the doorway, but his attention remained alert, ears still tuned to every sound outside. Lucas turned back toward Harold, something in his posture different now. Not just awareness, commitment. He looked once toward the door, toward the street beyond, where the man in the parka had disappeared. Then back at Harold. "This doesn't end with him," Lucas said, his voice steady, final. Harold didn't ask what he meant. He already knew. Lucas's jaw set, his eyes hardening just slightly, not with anger, but with decision. "Not anymore," he said. Snow fell softer that morning, not as sharp as before, settling quietly over. Anchorage, like the city itself, had decided to slow down and watch what was about to unfold. Lucas Halle did not move fast, but everything he did carried intent. The decision he had made the night before did not leave room for hesitation, and by dawn, the narrow space he had lived in for years, observe, disengage, move on, was gone. In its place was something older, something carved into him long before civilian life dulled its edges. He stood outside Harold Bennett's house, breath steady in the cold, while Rex sat beside him, alert but calm, the dog's amber eyes scanning the quiet street as if reading a language, invisible to everyone else. Lucas had already made the calls. The first to arrive was Marcus Reed Callahan, a man in his early 40s with a solid, grounded build that spoke more of endurance than strength alone. Reed's beard was thick and neatly trimmed, streaked with early gray. His dark hair cut short in a way that still followed, regulation out of habit rather than necessity. His eyes were deep-set, observant, carrying the weight of someone who had spent years making decisions, where hesitation cost lives. He walked with a slight stiffness in his left leg, a remnant of an injury that never fully healed, but it didn't slow him. It never had. Reed had been a communication specialist during deployment, the kind of man who didn't speak much unless it mattered. But when he did, people listened because he was rarely wrong. You don't call unless it's real, Reed said simply as he approached, his voice low, steady, cutting through the cold air without force. It's real, Lucas replied. Reed glanced once at Rex, then toward the house, then back at Lucas. That was enough for him. He didn't ask for more. The second was Daniel Hawk Rivera, younger than the others. Early 30s, lean and fast-moving, with sharp features and restless energy that hadn't settled. Even after leaving service, his black hair was kept longer than regulation would have allowed, falling slightly over his forehead, and a thin scar traced along his jawline, pale against his skin. Hawk had been reconnaissance, eyes first, always moving, always watching. Civilian life had never quite fit him. He compensated with motion, with purpose, with staying ahead of things before they could close in. You found something, Hawk said, stepping out of his truck, his gaze already scanning the neighborhood with practiced instinct. Lucas nodded once. More than something. They didn't go inside right away. Plans came first. Harold watched from the doorway, unsure at first, his posture hesitant, but something in the presence of these men, quiet, controlled, familiar in a way he couldn't fully explain, shifted his uncertainty into something closer to trust. He didn't understand the details. He didn't need to. He understood intention. Over the next hours, the shape of the problem became clear. Reed handled the calls, reaching out to contacts still connected to local authorities. Anchorage Police Department sent a liaison, Detective Sarah Whitaker, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a posture that suggested she had learned early how to command a room without raising her voice. She was tall, lean, with dark brown hair pulled back into a tight knot. Her features precise and controlled, but there was something else beneath it. Fatigue, yes, but also determination that hadn't been worn down yet. Sarah had built her reputation working financial exploitation cases, the kind that rarely made headlines, but quietly destroyed lives. You're telling me this isn't isolated? She said, standing in Harold's small living room, her gaze moving from the stack of unpaid bills to the photograph on the wall, then back to Lucas. It's organized, Lucas replied. He's not the only one. Sarah nodded slowly. We've had reports, she admitted. Elderly veterans, fixed incomes, missing small amounts over time, never enough to trigger immediate investigation until it adds up. Her jaw tightened slightly. We just didn't have anyone willing to talk. Harold shifted where he stood, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. They don't stop, he said quietly. Even if you try to ignore them, they come back. That was the missing piece. Fear sustained the system. Re-coordinated with Sarah, mapping patterns, identifying locations. Hawk moved through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, speaking to people who hesitated at first, then opened up when they realized someone was finally listening. Stories surfaced, similar, consistent, quiet. Small payments, regular visits. Threats never loud, but always clear. Rex became something else entirely in those hours. Not just a companion, not just a detector, but a presence that eased tension in rooms where words failed. He would approach slowly, head low, letting people see him, feel him, trust him before they trusted anyone else. It was subtle, but it mattered. By late afternoon, they had enough. Sarah made the call. The operation moved fast after that, faster than the system it targeted had been designed to handle. Officers moved in coordinated lines, vehicles unmarked but precise in placement. The man in the parka, his name they learned was Victor Kane, was picked up first, surprised not by the arrest itself, but by the fact that it had come at all. He didn't resist. Men like him didn't waste energy on lost positions. But Victor wasn't the top. That came next. Locations were hit almost simultaneously. Small houses, rented spaces, places chosen for invisibility. The pattern broke under pressure. Names surfaced, records followed. Within hours, what had been a quiet network operating in the margins was exposed. Harold didn't see the arrests, he didn't need to. He saw something else instead. That evening, people came, not in crowds, not loudly. One at a time, then two, then more. Other veterans, neighbors, people who had known something was wrong, but hadn't known how to step in. They stood in his doorway in his small living room, in the space that had once felt too empty, and for the first time in years, Harold Bennett wasn't alone in it. He sat in his chair, hands resting on his knees, listening more than speaking, the tension in his shoulders slowly unwinding with each quiet conversation, each shared story. Lucas stood near the edge of it all, not at the center, not needing to be. Rex lay at his feet, calm now, his work done for the moment. "You changed something," Sarah said quietly, stepping beside him. Lucas shook his head slightly. "It was already there. Maybe," she replied, "but no one was seeing it. That was the difference." Outside, the snow continued to fall, softer now, covering the marks left by the day's movement. Later, when the house had quieted again, Lucas stepped out onto the porch. Harold followed him to the door, but didn't step outside. He didn't need to. There was something steady in him now, something that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," Harold said. Lucas nodded once. That was enough. He turned, Rex rising smoothly beside him, and they walked down the steps into the cold evening air. The street was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. They moved through the neighborhood without urgency, just direction. When they reached the corner, Rex slowed, then stopped. His head lifted slightly, ears forward, eyes locking onto something inside a small convenience store across the street. Lucas followed his gaze. Inside, near the counter, an elderly man stood with a few items in his hands, shifting his weight uncertainly, his posture too familiar, his movements too careful. Lucas exhaled slowly, not tired, not frustrated, resolved. He looked down at Rex, then back at the store. "Yeah," he murmured, and together they stepped forward. No one gets left behind. Sometimes miracles don't come as thunder from the sky. They arrive quietly, through ordinary people choosing to care. Maybe God doesn't always change the world in a single moment, but He places the right people in the right place at the exact time. Someone needs hope the most. In our everyday lives, we pass by moments just like this. Someone struggling, someone unseen, someone waiting for even the smallest sign that they matter. And sometimes that sign is you. A kind word, a simple act, or even just noticing can become the miracle God works through. If this story touched your heart, share where you're watching from and tell me, have you ever experienced a moment like this? Your story might be the light someone else needs today. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists in this world. And if you believe in stories of courage, compassion, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect your path, and bring peace and strength into your life today and always.